Hello everyone, it's Charlie in Westeros here, and today I am making a little bit of a different video in which I will be discussing the event in Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire lore known as the Tragedy at Summerhall. Now, it goes without saying that this video contains book spoilers from A Song of Ice and Fire and the Duncan Egg tales, and this might not be the most friendly content for only show watchers. But if you are interested in taking a look at this video, I will share some links in the info box below that will address the general facts related to the topic I will be discussing. As always, these are just my thoughts, and nothing I theorize is necessarily absolute truth as far as it relates to Game of Thrones. So, without further ado, here is part 1 for my thoughts and theories on the tragedy at Summerhall. So what was the tragedy? The tragedy at Summerhall seems to be a highly significant event in the series of A Song of Ice and Fire, yet it is one that is very often glossed over if altogether ignored when looking at the overall plots of the series. As detailed, the tragedy at Summerhall took place in the Dornish Marches close to the Stormlands border with the Reach in 259 AC, or 40 years before the start of Game of Thrones, when the castles there were engulfed in flames and saw the death of 3 significant figures at the time. The figures being the commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Duncan the Tall, the King of Westeros, Aegon V, and his eldest son, Prince Duncan the Small Targaryen. Although the official cause of the fire is still unknown, it is apparently directly connected with Aegon V's desire to restore dragons to the Seven Kingdoms. Moreover, the famous Prince Rhaegar Targaryen was also born at Summerhall on the very same day of the tragedy. With all this information, there are many questions to be asked in conjunction with this specific event. Among them, how exactly did the fire break out? What is the significance of Rhaegar being born on the same day as this tragedy? And for the sake of this part 1 video, if Aegon V wanted to restore dragons to the Seven Kingdoms, why did he go to such lengths to make this happen? I will specifically seek to answer the why behind the tragedy at Summerhall. How the tragedy itself occurred, I will discuss at a later date. So here's some important background information first. As many of you might know, Aegon V is one of the principal characters in the Duncan Egg short story series, which detail this king's adventures as a boy, along with the then young hedge knight Sir Duncan the Tall, who of course would eventually command Aegon's Kingsguard later on. Now, insofar as the 3 short stories featuring Duncan Egg are concerned, none seem to imply that either Duncan the Tall or Aegon V at the time had any inclination of really wanting to bring dragons back into the world. Although Aegon was given a dragon egg when he was a baby, there is no real indication to demonstrate that the young Aegon was truly desperate to revive the dragons. According to the World of Ice and Fire, however, it was as Aegon grew older that he had come to dream of dragons flying once more above the 7 kingdoms of Westeros. Reportedly, in his later years, he would bring mages, septons, and maesters to pore over the last eggs in the 7 kingdoms. Whilst his counselors would try to dissuade him, Aegon grew even more convinced that only with dragons would he ever wield sufficient power to bring about the desired social changes in the realm, through forcing stubborn lords to accept his decrees that would grant freedom, rights, and protections to the small folk. This does sound a little bit like Daenerys in a sense. Regardless, his last years were consumed by a search for ancient lore about the dragon breedings of Valyria, and it was said that as Aegon commanded journeys to places as far away as Asshai by the Shadow, with the hopes of finding texts and knowledges that had not been preserved in the West. His desires culminated in what was meant to be a celebration of the impending birth of his great-grandson, Prince Rhaegar, but instead resulted in a much more somber event. The tragedy at Summerhall left very few witnesses alive, and those who survived would not speak of it. Only one tantalizing, partially ruined page written by Archmaester Gildane, the last maester to serve at Summerhall, leaves only some hints as to what transpired there. He wrote, "The blood of the dragon gathered in one, 7 eggs to honor the 7 gods, though the king's own septon had warned. Pyromancers. Wildfire. Flames grew out of control, towering, burned so hot that died, but for the valor of the Lord Command." The passage gives evidence enough that it sounds like magic or supernatural rituals were involved in the event, and evidently Sir Duncan the Tall did sacrifice himself to at least save some people. Presumably, in my mind, Rhaegar Targaryen, and his mother, Rhaella. This is a dark ending for the tale of Dunk and Egg indeed, but let's take a pause for a moment, as there are many ways to look at the situation itself, most notably Aegon's resolve in reviving the dragons. Among the many thoughts that could explain Aegon's decision, one might simply assume he was going a little mad in his later years, as seems to be the case with a number of Targaryen rulers, and was willing to go to extreme measures in bringing back the dragons because, just like his predecessors, it would give him some sort of additional power to combat his enemies, in spite of the risks. In his youth, Aegon's oldest brother was known to have a streak of cruel madness in him, so it might not be so hard to believe that Aegon could succumb to a similar fate. And yet, this to me does seem like a rather simple way of looking at the situation. Both Aegon and Duncan the Tall, as far as we know of them in the Hedge Knight series, they seem like level-headed individuals who were sound of mind. And surely if Duncan the Tall was worried that his king was losing his mind, he would have done something to prevent Aegon from going to such extreme and possibly risky measures far ahead of time. Remember that even in his youth, Duncan had no qualms of speaking his mind to, or even striking a Targaryen prince when he perceived them to be doing something wrong or unjust, even if it got him in hot waters. As such, I believe there must be a more thorough explanation than madness to allow for Aegon V wanting to bring back dragons into this world at possibly any cost. So here's one of two possibilities I would propose. The power of prophecy. There are an extensive number of Targaryens who seem to possess at least some degree of prophetic abilities and skills. As many know, the very reason the Targaryens escaped the doom of Valyria in the first place was thanks to the young woman known as Daenerys Targaryen, or Daenerys the Dreamer, who foresaw the doom 12 years before it happened and successfully relocated her family and 5 dragons to Dragonstone in Westeros. Meanwhile, in A Song of Ice and Fire, Dany is constantly enveloped with prophecies and visions as well. Yet all that said, there are some key Targaryens out there that are often overlooked as far as prophecies and visions are concerned. In the Dunk and Egg series, there are a significant number of Targaryen princes and pretenders who interact with the two protagonists, and who appear to possess some mysterious yet prophetic visions of the future. In fact, in the first Dunk and Egg tale, The Hedge Knight, one of the first characters Sir Duncan encounters is the drunkard prince Darren Targaryen, one of Egg's oldest brothers, who claims to have dreams of events to come, predicting the death of a Targaryen at the tourney at Ashford Meadow where Sir Duncan was heading. Even more significantly, he also prophesied that the dragons would someday return to the world. On a crazier note, Aegon's oldest brother, the cruel and arrogant Prince Aegon Targaryen, believed he was a dragon in human form, going so far as to drink a cup of wildfire, thinking it would turn him into a dragon. Of course, it only brought about his demise. Similarly, in the third Dunk and Egg tale, The Mystery Knight, the character of Sir John the Fiddler, who is in fact revealed to be the rival Targaryen claimant to the throne, Daemon Blackfyre II, equally asserts that he has prophetic dreams, rightly predicting that Sir Duncan would become a member of the Kingsguard, and that there would be a hatching of a dragon egg at White Walls, the home of House Butterwells. Although a literal dragon did not hatch there, the equally mysterious figure of Lord Brynden Rivers would point out that it was the Targaryen Prince Aegon, the very prince who would become Aegon V, who was the real dragon that hatched there, becoming a resolute and strong individual. Interestingly enough, Aegon V himself cites yet another Targaryen who predicted the return of the dragon someday, being his uncle, King Aegon I. With all this in mind, I now posit the question: is it possible that Aegon V was capable of having visions of dragons returning to the world? Certainly it would explain a partial aspect in understanding why he would want to bring back the dragons, but it certainly doesn't cover the entire rationale, so I am willing to take it a step further. Is it possible Aegon V Targaryen not only had visions of the dragons returning, but also of some greater threats looming over Westeros in the future, most notably the White Walkers? The fact that they appear to be a dire threat to the land at this point in A Song of Ice and Fire, and assuming Aegon saw this vision, it would absolutely help explain his desire to bring dragons back into the realm. Moreover, it would also explain why Aegon might have been more anxious in reviving the dragons, whilst not overtly speaking of the others to anyone, as by this point in the story, nobody in the realm would actually believe these creatures ever even existed. Certainly, the general notion of bringing about peace and protection to the common folk is a noble cause, but to bring back the dragons because of it seems like a rather extreme decision for the likes of Aegon. Regardless of whether or not that is the case, there is certainly no question in my mind that the ability to see visions of the future is present in quite a few of the Targaryens, and the fact that it seems to play such an intriguing role in the formative years of Aegon's life would lead me to believe that something can be said of prophecy. Now, if you find this specific train of thought dubious, then allow me to present an alternative and potentially more promising hypothesis in explaining Aegon's actions at Summerhall. The involvement of Brynden Rivers. Even if Aegon V himself does not have the ability to see visions of the future, there is one controversial and somewhat mysterious character who makes an appearance in both the Duncan Egg Tales and A Song of Ice and Fire, and thus far seems to be of paramount importance to the overall story. That character is Brynden Rivers, also known as Bloodraven. Of course, we all know him as the three-eyed raven figure from A Song of Ice and Fire, who draws Bran north of the Wall with the reeds. However, Brynden Rivers is historically known for the peculiar relationship he had with Aegon V Targaryen. Whilst Brynden Rivers was an illegitimate child of a previous king, he was nevertheless a Targaryen loyalist during the Blackfyre rebellions. Whilst Aegon V was on the verge of becoming king, Brynden Rivers, who was then the hand of the king, went so far as to invite a rebel claimant to the throne, Aenys Blackfyre, to peacefully participate in the Great Council that would select the next king, only to have him arrested and beheaded in the Red Keep. Because of Brynden Rivers' murder of the Blackfyre rival, under the guise of peace, Aegon V, upon becoming King of Westeros, had Brynden arrested and sentenced him to death. However, Brynden Rivers argued that he sacrificed his honors for the good of the realm, so Aegon instead allowed him to be a member of the Night's Watch, eventually even being elected the Lord Commander of the Watch before ultimately disappearing whilst ranging beyond the Wall. And of course, we know he would go on to become the Three-Eyed Raven, or the last Greenseer, living with the children of the forest. It is also significant to note that Brynden Rivers being made a Greenseer should not be entirely surprising in spite of his Targaryen heritage. Rivers' mother was Melissa Blackwood. The Blackwoods themselves were an ancient house and one of the few south of the Neck to worship the old gods, whilst residing in the Riverlands. Furthermore, there are extensive hints to show that the Blackwoods just might have intermarried with the children of the forest, or at the very least, have some strong affinity towards their faith, demonstrated by the fact that they bury some of their dead beneath the dead weirwoods of their seat at Raventree. Of course, while their possible children of the forest bloodline is speculative on my part, what is undoubtedly true is the affinity the Blackwoods hold in regards to the old gods. Now, why is Brynden Rivers' origins and fate relevant to the tragedy at Summerhall? Here's why. Aegon V's eldest son, Prince Duncan, aptly named after the commander of the Kingsguard, went against his father's wishes and married for love to a woman known as Jenny of Oldstones. Jenny of Oldstones was notably friends with a wood witch we know as the Ghost of Highheart, seemingly the same wood witch who makes an appearance in A Storm of Swords and sees death in Arya. Whilst this wood witch predicted the prince that was promised would be born to Aegon's grandchildren, Aerys and Rhaella's line, it is equally important to mention that Jenny of Oldstones believed her friend to be one of the children of the forest. If we take the fact that the Ghost of Highheart is indeed one of the children of the forest, and the only other known children of the forest reside with Brynden Rivers north of the Wall, then it isn't out of the realm of the possible that the Ghost of Highheart and Brynden Rivers, as the Greenseer, had contact with one another, especially via weirwood trees. In the books, Thoros of Myr tells Arya Stark the following, quote, "She has her own way of knowing things, that one. The weirwoods whisper in her ear when she sleeps." Certainly the Ghost of Highheart was able to convince Aegon's second son, Jaehaerys, to marry his own children, Prince Aerys, who would go on to become the Mad King, and Princess Rhaella, so that the prince that was promised would come from their line, but somehow I sense that it would take much more than a wood witch to convince Aegon V to bring about the tragedy at Summerhall. So, assuming Aegon V does not have the ability to produce prophetic dreams or have visions of his own, Is it possible that Bloodraven himself was able to imbue or do something to encourage Aegon either directly or through his contact with the Ghost of High Heart to unwittingly make the sacrifice he made at Summerhall? Certainly, we only know so much about the Green Seer's power, which include power over nature and prophetic visions, but considering Brynden Rivers was able to communicate with Bran through visions, could it not also be possible that Bloodraven sent forth visions of the future in which revived dragons were fighting the others to Aegon V, or even show him the threat of a looming White Walker invasion, thereby encouraging the king to perform rituals and even blood magic, possibly so that the dragons could be revived in the first place? Of course, this also begs the question as to which side Bloodraven is on, irrespective as to whether or not Bloodraven and the Ghost of High Heart are in contact with one another. It does make one wonder, did Bloodraven potentially instigate the tragedy at Summerhall, knowing it would result in the death of Aegon V, and or possibly prevent the birth of Rhaegar Targaryen, for fear that the prince that was promised would come, because Brynden Rivers is in fact working for the others? Or on the flip side, could Bloodraven have helped instigate the tragedy, knowing that it was a necessary part of some sacrificial ritual for Rhaegar to be born, and any offspring of his line becoming the prince that was promised? Remember, Bloodraven doesn't seem averse to the idea of committing murder, so long as it is done for the supposed betterment of the realm, as he did in the past. Moreover, in A Dance of Dragons, Barristan Selmy asserts that he believes the Wood Witch died at the tragedy at Summerhall, thereby indicating that she was at the very least present during the rituals or events that transpired that fateful day, again making her a very suspicious character in the story, especially if she was able to predict the outcome of that fateful day. It is difficult for me to believe that Aegon V would so easily take the words of a Wood Witch at face value, which is why I think the powers of Bloodraven as the Green Seer might have been involved in some capacity, and why I think he and the Ghost of High Heart were in contact with one another, and very well might still be. It is true that Aegon V did face some opposition from the landed nobles during his reign, due to the many laws, rights, and protections he granted and bestowed upon the small folk, but unless he was falling under some form of Targaryen madness, it does seem a little strange to want to revive the dragons only to use them as tools of oppression. Or again, I return to my earlier thoughts of him having prophetic visions, and maybe he foresaw a dragon freeing enslaved people, and thought this was meant to refer to him, only for it to really be a vision of Daenerys Targaryen at the likes of Slaver's Bay. One thing for sure, however, is that prophecies and visions are very tricky. What is undoubtedly true in my mind is that sorcery and magic was performed at Summerhall on that fateful day. With pyromancers and wildfire being used, I feel quite convinced in saying that if Sir Duncan the Tall of the Kingsguard felt Aegon V was committing a grave mistake, he would have had no qualms in stopping his king far ahead of time. At the very least, I do think that visions and prophecies play a strong role in Aegon V making the decision of trying to revive the dragons at Summerhall, and evidently, this tragically backfired.
Well, folks, I think I discussed the tragedy at Summerhall extensively enough for this part of the video series. If enough of you are interested in some more extensive thoughts I have as far as the tragedy at Summerhall are concerned, I will certainly be happy to make a part 2 video in which I discuss how the tragedy of Summerhall happened, and even a part 3 for this video series in which I discuss its multi-layered impact later on. But for now, what do you folks think? Do you think I am on the right track in thinking that there are some deeper issues at play in explaining why Aegon V wanted to revive the dragons? If not, what do you think? Do you have any specific thoughts as to why Summerhall occurred in the way it did? And if so, what are they? Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If so, don't forget to hit the like button down below and subscribe to my channel, and please check out my other recent videos. I am sure you will enjoy them as well. And as always, I thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time. Take care.